Kicking off. Welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to introduce Nick Wyman today. He's going to talk to us about his latest book, Attract, Retain, and Develop, Shaping a Skilled Workforce for the Future. Nick is a long-time friend of AFA, collaborator with Bob Lerman, and a leader in the US apprenticeship field with the Institute for Workplace Skills and Innovation, which he founded. So Nick's an international expert on workforce development and apprenticeship, both in the US and in Australia. So really excited to hear from you, Nick, today on your book. And just to say, couldn't come at a better time with renewed interest in apprenticeship expansion for the administration and a new goal to reach 1 million active apprentices. Just a quick bit of housekeeping. So this is going to be recorded, and we'll share it around afterwards. Nick's gonna talk up front for about 25 minutes, half an hour, and then we'll open up questions. So feel free to put any questions as we're going along in the sidebar, or wait till the end, and we'll open up. And yeah, that was everything I was going to say. So over to you, Nick.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And firstly, Harry, we wanted to recognise Apprenticeships for America and the leadership at what you quite rightly pointed out is a pivotal time. I feel like we're constantly at a pivotal time, but this one more so than ever. Employers are looking to solutions in not only a rapidly changing domestic environment, but also in the international stage. And so I think as companies start to reevaluate how they're bringing people into their companies and looking for models, this is apprenticeships time to shine. And I think as your group is shaping the executive, the responses to the executive orders, which is a great initiative, I think the conversation very much, if my internet drops out and the call ends here, the thing I'd like everyone to take from today is that it's time now for action. I think we've had there's been plenty of talk, but now I think there is time to really get that traction on the front line. And I'm here, and the people that I work with, and I see a few faces this morning of people that are in my work group or I collaborate with, but we always welcome conversations with others. And I really wanted to focus on what it takes to move from good ideas to real outcomes. This really is an opportunity for government. It's a great solution for government when you think about, what apprenticeship actually delivers for governments, I should say, federal, state. And of course, apprenticeships, the old cliche makes good dollars and cents, but bringing more taxpayers into an economy and bringing up the next generation of workers. But there's also great opportunities for people, young people as they transition from school to work. So that's on a lot of people's minds across the country. And that school to work transition was, of course, interrupted for many young people during the COVID period, but also apprenticeship for people who are reskilling, rebooting their careers, who've been displaced by AI. Interestingly, I read an article the other day about the tech jobs are no longer what they used to be. Remember when it was all shiny and exciting to work for the big tech companies? And it's just now become the 9 to 5 grind as the pressure's been applied. All the perks, all the scooters in the hallway have gone. All those snacks and Nerf gun wars down the hallway seem to have disappeared, and it's just down to routine. So there's a lot of even, the golden era for IT and tech has really changed. So we'll move into a couple of slides, and I think I really did want this to be a conversation. So we'll have a look at a few of these and see if it sparks some conversation, and then I'll come back to you all in about 20 minutes. and we can go from there, Harry, and we can have some conversation amongst the group. So as I've mentioned, we really are at this interesting crossroads, not only in the economy, but as skills and innovation are very much colliding. And businesses and governments need new ways to build competitive advantage. And I'm certainly not an academic. For my academic friends who've joined me, they know that I'm a very practical, rubber meets the road person. But my take or my summary, my layman's summary of competitive advantages, what can we do that others are going to find hard to duplicate and replicate? And there are so many amazing things that people can build into apprenticeship programs so that companies can build this unique competitive advantage. And we'll talk about a few I've been involved with. One is a program I set up with ExxonMobil. And I've written a paper about that for the International Association of Apprenticeship Conference in the UK next week. But that really talks about a collaboration between a community non-profit enterprise and a large global corporation in a remote location, offshore exploration, and how apprenticeship has really brought this community together and able to meet the needs of a fairly rapidly changing workforce environment that is in exploration. There are some, great opportunities. There's some great opportunities, just to finish up, as we said, for businesses, reduced hiring costs, more innovation, and an opportunity to bring in the next generation of workers, as they still have large numbers of people marching off into retirement. I think a lot of people have reconsidered their lives post-COVID. And one of the things that I talk about in the book is there's a lovely, well, I do like a cup of coffee. And I have a nice graphic of a large coffee machine to depict the machine of business. Businesses have things that they need to deliver. They're looking for results. Boards are looking for results. On the other side of this graphic, I've got a takeaway coffee cup, which is the individual. People got the choice or got the to see what it was like, to work from home potentially, and work-life balance, and starting to really reevaluate and ask, what does it all mean? I don't know if anyone speaks German, but I've got a painting in my house. Was das bedeuten? What does it all mean? And so really the book and how apprenticeship comes into this a lot is saying, well, how can we meet in this common ground? And there was an academic by the name of Fritz Berghoff who came up with some theories around this. But it really is, how can, businesses achieve their goals whilst individuals remain satisfied, beyond remuneration, and nothing like a structured skills building program where a person, once qualified, can continue to learn in a state of lifelong learning. So governments, as we said, lower unemployment, higher economic resilience, and individuals. The point that I just made there, which is this idea of upward mobility, that the person can continue to learn throughout their life. I know several people who've taken on second apprenticeships, so they have a dual qualification in, for instance, electrotechnology or mechatronics or something like that. or people who, as I did, left school. It wasn't the place for me. I like to learn with my head and hands, and classroom was not the place for me. So at that stage in my life, an apprenticeship was ideal. I could learn on the job and be paid. And I returned to education several times throughout my career. Final point I wanted to make about that is that there are several countries leading on apprenticeships that have higher productivity per capita. So I think we've talked about some traditional hiring models and post-prey and possibly poach collapsing. And so it really is about building a grassroots ground up solution. And I think with all the people who are on this call, I see there's a mix, Harry and team, I see there's a mix of people from intermediaries, from government agencies, and I think there is a lot of people out there willing to help. And from an employer's perspective, remembering that we can't do this without employers. They are the cornerstone of apprenticeship. Some employers may want to get more involved or less involved in the apprenticeship process. Some may want to start and run programs themselves, whereas others know the benefit but just don't have the time. So I think that's where there's a real role for trusted intermediaries. So things that are also broken today, and I don't want to talk too much negatively on the first thing in the morning or for the folks on the East Coast at lunchtime. But, talent acquisition budgets are ballooning, and they're not solving a lot of the core issues. And, there are some staffing agencies, not all staffing agencies out there, who are simply just placing out online. They don't have a secret source for producing candidates. And it really isn't working out in long-term solutions. And I'm actually seeing a pushback from some of these this idea that if all else fails, you can just pay a placement fee and you're going to magically have this trained talent ready to come into your organization, who of course won't know the culture. So I think it's about building talent, not buying talent. So we've talked already. I won't go on too much about this, but we've talked about that apprenticeships do work for everyone. It really is. I was actually going to call my book The Win-Win Workplace, but realized every second book on Amazon's called Win-Win something, or win-win strategies for success. But anyway, these are important things you discover as you get down the book process. It must have had about 15 working titles over a good decade. The last time I produced a book was in 2016. But the win-win workplace, I do believe in this idea that it can be a win for employers. Back to the coffee machine, takeaway coffee cup. It can be a win for employers, and it can be a win for apprentices, individuals. We've seen some productivity return on investment, and it would be great, Bob, to have that conversation in the UK next week about how we can start to look at some new data and new statistics coming through, because quite often I think people latch on to things from possibly 1 or 2 administrations ago. I think we've now got so much more data in the last 5, 7, 10 years, and there really is a very, very strong case for the return on investment. It's not a matter of if apprenticeships work. It really comes down to, as I said earlier, this idea of where rubber meets the road, but this idea of implementation. Without standing on a soapbox here, we need to stop treating apprenticeships like pilot projects and just funding another project. We actually need to fund a system, and I know Apprenticeships for America is very much looking at that. We need to get away from this idea of these sort of short cyclical projects, some which are very successful, some which are not. And then, people getting out their calculator and dividing it back into the project cost and saying that this apprenticeship costs $70,000. That's not how it should be. So I think if we look at this systematic funding, and by doing that, everyone wins. But I think leadership and what we're all doing here today is very much about leadership. And that's why I think the responses to the executive order are going to be a huge opportunity with those upcoming sessions. I've come across plenty of companies in my time, and in transparency, I don't work with Toyota or Amazon, but I'm always interested in what other companies are doing, and I really liked. There's plenty of books on Toyota and interesting things they've done, and I particularly like their work around how humankind and machines can work together in harmony. And this is not something new, and this is certainly not something since AI. And if there's anybody who speaks Japanese, they're going to pick me up on my pronunciation, but I think it's called Jidoka, but we can look that up, or you can look that up later. But it's this idea of how humans should not fear technology. They should use technology. So technology isn't going to replace a lot of jobs, but it's going to certainly change things. I went off to a medical practice yesterday, and this doctor's surgery of the 21st century does not look like visiting a GP of yesteryear. In room one, they had a thing called ExoMind, which is a new way that actually a Czech from my homeland, a Czechoslovakia or a Czech-Slovak inventor has created this electrical impulses to stimulate the brain to treat depression and anxiety and things like that. And then in room number two, there was a way to lose weight by sitting on all these interesting tools. My point there being, there was still a doctor, there is still somebody operating that machinery. So there was a person who'd actually just completed a traineeship, sadly not an apprenticeship, with that practitioner, but people still want that human touch. I don't want to walk up to a vending machine and put in my dollar, or probably a little bit more than that, and then put my head forward into the machine and receive my treatment. I still want to have that interaction. This is certainly not an ad for Amazon, and we all know that Amazon has its challenges, and I think it's going to be very interesting how the tariffs play out. But they have undertaken some significant efforts around reskilling people for an AI future. There's definitely something when we're looking at this buy and build argument around and to the name of the book. It's all very well to attract talent, but you need to build in strategies to retain, and then by virtue developing people. If you have opportunities for people to climb the career progression ladder, I think that really is going to drive retention. And we've already talked about the lowering the hiring costs, and also this idea of being able to innovate early, because you can really bring people into your organization, and it's not just the technical skills. It's the culture of the organization and how that organization actually develops. And I think we have to teach people how to learn. And I was really interested when I was understanding from some of these large organizations and how they operate their call centers. The people answering the phones If you can actually ever get to somebody, don't try that with LinkedIn or Facebook ever. But if you can actually speak to a human that's not an AI bot or AI generated in a help desk situation, the person at the other end doesn't know all the information, but they know where to find the information. And that information is constantly training. So it is this idea about lifelong learning and constant change. And I think, the last point there is that there's no question for those that have been in apprenticeship for a while, you eventually end up in an accountant's office somewhere saying there must be a cheaper way. This seems expensive. Who's paying for the training? Whose job is it for this? This is an investment in the company. So I'd like to get out of those conversations early. In other words, accountants are quite often the kiss of death, so stay away from them if you're trying to build a program. I mean, you've got to put forward a good business case. But on that, jokes aside, I like this idea of top-down support. You need rock solid executive support, be it a superintendent in a school district. If you're implementing something with a school district, you can have a great idea coming up through the teaching faculty, but if it gets lost in translation, and that's the same with a company. If you've got somebody on the executive team who, in a quote, gets it, executive, a person on the board, the chances of your program succeeding are much higher. So we've looked at what are some of the challenges, but I really wanted to make this point. I like the word modern apprenticeship, and I think that quite often, as I mentioned, there's this idea of mid-career reskilling and upskilling. And sometimes that's driven by choice. People's children, or they might be empty nesters, leave home and they start to come back to, what does it all mean? What am I doing here? What's the purpose? What makes me happy? And asking questions. Whereas others are being displaced by changes in industries. I mean, if you looked at, say, for instance, the automotive sector at the moment, some manufacturers have just stopped importing, and I certainly won't get into the economics of that. Not that I'm an expert on economics. And I think that, of course, and I'm moving on from, but just to state an obvious position for us all, that we all need to constantly remind people. I feel, gee, I've said this before, but I say it to people and they say, really? When I say, apprenticeships are not just, building and construction, there are still some myths and misconceptions out there. And, we need to have this consistent message moving forward. And I think the idea around this idea of flexibility, I really very much like to customize an apprenticeship program. And you could have a program where if you have 12 components to your program, 9 could be off the shelf. The person could be trained at a community college with others doing exactly the same thing. But there's definitely an opportunity in a part of the program to customize it, to the person's business needs. I like the idea of, apprenticeships being modular and really linked back to what's going on in the business, as companies move forward. And I think that, as we saw, apprenticeship did survive through lockdowns and pandemics, and, they can work remotely. My daughter, unfortunately not an apprenticeship, but she got an internship with an entertainment company. I said, fantastic. When are you going? She said, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm coming home from college. I'm going to sit in my bedroom and run it from there. I'm like, fantastic. So I'll be interested to see how that goes she's into doing something in social media. I think, we also need to look at, I mentioned community colleges as the training partner, but I think there is a huge opportunity for higher education. And I think that, college or bust, I like to say college or bust, not anymore. And college does deliver outstanding pathways for many people, but not all people. And I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about higher education that we're not saying it's either or. It can be both. And one of the things that I really love about some of the European models, particularly Switzerland, is that people move between different pathways, um, between apprenticeship and academic pathways. So we're almost at the end of um, um, what I wanted to talk to you, about before we open up to questions. Um, I I think in this age of AI, without hammering it home too much, this idea of the human factor, I touched on it with the Toyota example, about not fearing technology and the robots are going to take our jobs. Um, I think we need to um, constantly be mindful of the importance. And I see that one of my colleagues, Steve Hamilton's online, who's done some wonderful work in mentorship. And I still believe that mentorship is really what will keep the apprenticeship movement growing strong, because it has to be about quality apprenticeship, and we've all seen this, coming for a very long time. But companies have spent all this time setting up programs. How are we going to? We've attracted this great talent, and we've had our public relations department do some wonderful advertising. We've now got these people in our organisation, but how are we going to retain them? And we want to get well away from these 1 in 2 apprentices drop out or fail. If we're able to offer each apprentice in our programs access to a quality mentor, and that person quite often is best served not necessarily by the person's supervisor. That's a manager or supervisor. They need somebody else within the organisation. I often say to younger adults or younger people, you've now got the job. Here's some tips on how you're going to keep the job. And we have some very practical orientation material for apprentices. So if you're starting a program, beyond mentorship, another area that I always recommend people look at is that orientation. And there was a report in Australia called the first 90 days. I'm a little bit sort of got a narrower time frame on that. I like to think it's the first 90 minutes. You really need to set the scene, with particularly with a younger worker, really engage them, and talk about some very practical things. Assign them a mentor or possibly a work buddy. It could be another apprentice. If you're like an Exxon Mobil, they have apprentices ranging from first year up to fourth year. I have some customers or clients in Australia who have apprenticeships that are 5 years long in aeronautical engineering. So you've had somebody who's been, in the workforce for 5 years working on very complicated, aircraft. You've got somebody who shows the aptitude, but it's their first day of the apprenticeship. Setting up a buddy system can work really well. Another important thing is we don't always assume that that just because the chief executive or the managing director of an organization has said, yes, let's have an apprenticeship program, that by the time that filters down to the operational level, that the frontline managers are going to actually understand what this is all about. So don't take don't assume that that's going to work. So if you really want to build a quality program, offering some sort of training to managers, how they could be trained as mentors, not just supervisors, but also, what are the expectations? And there's a social demographer in Australia by the name of Mark McCrindle, and he does some really interesting work around different generations. And he put out this series of lovely reports called Bridging the Gap. And if you think of a bridge like the Sydney Harbour Bridge, we may as well, it can be the Golden Gate Bridge, it can be any big bridge. On one side, we've got employers. On the other side, we've got employees. What does each party need and want, and how can we bring them together in the middle? And I use a version of that I developed with Mark for my own in-house apprentices, a version of Bridging the Gap. So I have a book where I take we take out and go through with supervisors, frontline managers, and say, hey, I know you might have some ideas about, younger generations and technology and varying things. But let me tell you the realities of your workforce. You've got an aging workforce. Was where with an apprentice, we might say, look, I know when you pull out your smartphone to take a note, um, unfortunately, other people in the workplace might think you're just checking up on your latest social media feed. Nothing like a pad and pencil. So we have varying, very practical, don't park in that car park on your first day that says, managing director, or don't eat that really good looking sandwich and drink that can of soda in the lunchroom. These are ways, don't befriend the person who seems to be having all the fun, because quite often they could be the person under performance management. But and then we get into, if things do start to go wrong and there is a mentoring arrangement in place, we can offer some very, very practical advice at this time. So I think um, we really need to, get into this idea of pride and ownership of apprenticeship programs. And I think having an off-the-shelf program suits many companies. With others, I've found great success in involving them in the journey. So you might go with, a base model car, and then you can definitely customize it with that organisation. So just another minute or two. In my book, I didn't want to have anything on the Apprenticeships for America YouTube site that might, get the video taken down. But in my book, it doesn't say get stuff done. You can leave it to your imaginations. The book's a little bit gritty. And people who have actually read this book, it's actually interesting. A couple of people have actually taken time to read this book, and I'm looking forward to the audio book. I'm an audio book guy myself, so you can listen to American Nick, which is very off-putting for people who know me. They're used to this accent, and they're like, gee, that person does not sound like you. But I really have tried to be as authentic in the book as possible. And it's very personal. I talk about my father and my journey leaving high school and becoming an apprentice, and how I got back into the movement. But time to get stuff done. This is the call to action. Um, and as I said, no more pilots, and respectfully, no more panels. It's time for execution. I won't say no, because someone will find this and say, "Look, you said no more panel." I think that if there are panels, my favourite panel is there was one that we did with a group of people, including Bob with the Southern, one of the apprenticeship networks in California, and the panel was fantastic, and that was because um, it was apprentices, and that was what people still talk about. 3 years later, people remember some of the stories of how this one apprentice who worked for one of the big tech companies had a role in the Hubble telescope or something like that, or the International Space Station, and he was a part of that larger movement. This idea of designing flexible programs, focus on outcomes, and focus. It really is important. In the book, there's a documentary about, not a documentary in the book, but I watched a documentary and wrote about it in the book, about Warren Buffett and Bill Gates having a conversation at one of their, at a retreat, and it was just the two of them sitting there, and they said, let's write down the most important thing in business on a piece of paper and show each other. And they both turned over the piece of paper, and it said the word focus was written on there. So I think there's something to take away from that. Um, Final point, and then we'll come to the conversation, is we've talked about focusing on outcomes, retention, and engagement, just not just hiring, but working with partners. You need partners to make apprenticeship work, and that's what my last decades have taught me. Schools, workforce boards. I won't give up with some community colleges. Some have been slow to come to the party and perceived apprenticeships to be a threat, which is always interesting. Where in my one of my homelands, Australia, the TAFE system is well ingrained with apprenticeship. It's worked hand in hand. They do the training of the apprentices. There are intermediaries called group training organisations, or GTOs, who manage the administration, mentoring, payroll, act as the employer of record. All right. And as I transition from the slides, I did say that working with partners was going to be my last thing I was going to say before I open up to questions. But I think we need to celebrate wins publicly. We really need to get the story out. Higher education has done a great job over the years of getting the message out. And I think when there's stories to tell, particularly about employers, resonate with employers, but also stories about people whose lives have been changed through the apprenticeship movement. So that said, Harry, that gives us a few minutes for questions. And as you said, this is being recorded. If people have dropped off, or they can come back to it, or I'm always available.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nick. That was great. Couldn't agree more with your final messages there. No more pilots. Get stuff done and tell the stories. I'm going to open up for questions and comments. I see, Cynthia, you've got your hand up. If anyone else wants to ask a question or has got a comment or a thought, please put your hand up and we'll come to you. But Cynthia, we'll start with you.
Hi, Nick. How are you doing? Good to hear from you. Hey, I've got my book right here. And you have a quote that I absolutely love on page 189. And it says, indeed, mentors are not just guides. They're they're lighthouses that illuminate our potential, inspiring a surge of newfound confidence and broadening our horizons. I love that quote. And I really enjoy your stories. I would love for you to just share a little bit about one-on-one mentoring. Just expand a little bit of that. I think you do a really good job in the book. And I know on page 196, you did an acrostic on trust. I don't want to give your goodies away, but it is outstanding. So, my heart beats mentoring. So good job. But I'd love to hear more. So
yeah, thanks, Cynthia. The world ain't all perfect. I lost my way a little bit a couple of years ago. And in the acknowledgements at the start of the book, there's a friend of mine, a friend and colleague. Her name's Natalie. And one day she kind of grabbed me walking down the street and said, reminded me what this whole thing is about. I got so caught up in policy and articles and blogs and timelines and revenues and all these things. And it really is about, it's about the individual. And each and every individual. And in California, last year, we started a program called Ready, Willing and Able. And this was placing people of any age with disabilities into careers. And it's interesting how mentor relationships come up. This one particular lady, Joyce, chose me, and she pursued me. I met her at a career expo, and somehow a mentor-mentee, informal relationship started to form. Every time she went for a job interview, she'd record a video and send it to me. Now, how can you not kind of engage with that? And there'd be tears and then of course there was a text message with, oh, I'm worried about this, and here I was. So it doesn't need, you don't need to have some structured arrangement, Cynthia. I think that it's a bit of a calling. And also, some of the most successful mentoring I've ever seen. I set up a STEM in schools program, and that was a partnership with some tech companies and some different governments. And one of the key pieces of this program was finding mentors for high school seniors and juniors in workplaces undertaking work experience. And originally, the project group was saying this is going to be a burden on the project, and we're going to have to pay companies to find people within the companies to mentor. And I said, you know what? Go out to your workforces. And they said, but HR people. I said, no, not HR. Finance, admin, people who are middle long-term career people within the organization. So they put it out there, for instance, in this very large hospital that just dominated this community. Like, I don't know how many people are in the community, but the largest employer by far was this hospital. It had 60,000 employees in this town, where the next largest employer was like 2,000. Mentors were coming, CFO, all these really interesting roles, and it was actually having this positive effect on the organizations as well. So the point was that the benefits of mentoring go far beyond that, individual. People were actually re-engaging with the company. And what does it all mean? I don't know what page that lovely painting's on by Corinne, but what does it all mean? This was a great way of companies retaining their existing workers. Thanks for reading the book. I'll send you that. Everyone who reads a book who asks me about a specific page will get a complimentary audio book.
That's excellent.
Thanks, Nick. Bob, do you want to come in?
Yeah, Nick, I wonder if you could say something about two issues. One is getting the apprentices to do real work, having options within the organization so that when they start, they're doing things that are productive, meaning you'd have to pay somebody else to do the work. And then the second thing, which I think is very important in communicating to the public, is the issue of pride upon completion of the apprenticeship and graduation ceremony. So first on the finding tasks that apprentices can do even when they aren't experienced, but can start in right away.
Great. I think our intermediary movement is building, Bob, and nothing like having an intermediary or someone who's building that program there. We have, and as you know, I've been at it, with this intermediary companies for a long time. We constantly have conversations where apprentices in some very large, well-known companies end up just, sweeping the shop floor, or and you're just like, what? And so it's really important, because if you don't address that, that person may very well drop out. And sadly, they might not just drop out of that workplace, they might just drop out of the apprenticeship altogether. If they're a part of an intermediary or a union program, they potentially could be, placed within another workplace. But I think it really is a lot around the program that, I suppose, Bob, the nuts and bolts of program design. Once you've identified the occupation, engaging the internal team. And I think I talked before about this idea of educating supervisors. Even if you don't have an intermediary, I'd like to work with your group here. And there is some I've done on other projects that's around online, but I think we can, work with and duplicate that. Some training, a toolkit for new employers, really highlighting some of the reasons that apprentices fail, or in the positive, what are some ways that you can protect your investment? And that idea of making sure that the work is meaningful and that the apprentice is actually seeing career progression. I work with a transport and logistics company that's like going back into the 1950s. Not that I know. I only know a little bit about the 1960s. But anyway, these are workshops where you still get the foreman who has like a screw in the corner, they sort of talk, and they've got a jacket on, a grey jacket, a foreman's jacket, and they have like a book in their office for each apprentice, and it's like a work log. And it's not just got what the apprentice is learning in related instruction, Bob, it's got what the apprentice is learning in the workplace. So I think formally documenting that in a logbook, I think is a great way. As far as pride and celebration, I touched on that early. LinkedIn, a LinkedIn network of apprentice alumni. Nothing like when it's recruitment season for our intermediaries, we actually have apprentice ambassadors, people who've graduated telling their story to others. I think there's a lot of great ideas have come, with our friends and networks in the UK with Tom Bewick and others. Some innovations that have been, tried and tested in the UK. But one thing that you'll see if you look at countries that have run long-standing successful apprenticeship programs is that milestones are supported and recognised. Like in Australia, the Australian government runs this thing called the National Training Awards, where apprentices are recognised in each category, and employers and individuals can nominate. And it's in all sorts of, ranging from, technical skills or, but right through into, school-based apprentices or apprentices from different backgrounds. It could be Indigenous apprentices, or and then there's also recognitions of partnership programs, and that then is really picked up, and it actually gets a run outside of workforce media. It actually gets a run in mainstream media. So I think the more we can do to change and educate the program, and I know between all of us we've got a really good and growing network of people from some very influential publications. And I feel in the last year or two, Bob, we've kind of broken out of the same old stories, just going around and around again, featuring the same employers and the same programs that frankly didn't really develop from when they were established years ago. I won't say those programs, but for those who've been around, you'll know what I'm talking about. And there's nothing wrong with those programs, but there are so many other wonderful things that have happened out there. So I think definitely some sort of recognition would be a recognition and an alumni and an alumni. I think I need a coffee.
Thanks, Nick. There's some great ideas there and things we can think about on National Apprenticeship Awards. Keith, do you want to come in?
Nick, I have my book as well. I haven't been as good. I haven't read through it like Cynthia yet, so super excited to get through it though. but I get the joy of working with Nick with IWSI as an intermediary and helping grow apprenticeship. Nick, there's one slide that kind of resonated with me, more than others that I think, it was a failure of apprenticeship or why apprenticeships fail. And there's two things on there that I think are extremely important is, leadership not bought into apprenticeship, and also focusing on only entry level apprenticeships. And I think those two things, one, saying more of a comment, and then also kind of wanted your perspective on things. Um, I think those are extremely important, and it's challenging. I see an apprenticeship in a lot of fields because people come from, higher education in leadership as opposed to the apprenticeship route. And I see one area, that has been very successful over the years in the States, and primarily I'm in California, and that's the construction industry, right? And I think a reason leadership is bought in the construction industry is so many people in leadership came through the apprenticeship route. So I guess my question, and kind of wanted to get your perspective on, is how do we continue to change that culture with leadership, and getting them bought into apprenticeship, and then also develop those apprenticeships for folks that are already in working and are growing into becoming leaders. So I just wanted to kind of get your perspective on how we take that model from, say, construction and replicate it in other areas.
Well, thanks, Keith. I think perceptions are not reality. Perceptions not reality, and I think that there are factors constantly playing towards apprenticeship that and as I said, around this idea of college is going to lead to a lucrative career. I think we'll say that myth has been busted thanks to mainstream media. But now it's for us, and crippling loan debt. I don't even know. I lost count. I mean, last time I wrote a story about that, I remember it was a huge number, and then I looked again recently and went, wow, that's got worse. The student debt. And this idea of, how work-based learning. But I love this idea of myth busting without breaching any trademarks or anything like that. It's not a bad name for a TV show, but I think someone might have thought of it. But, myth busting. But, to me, you touched on a couple of myths or we'll call it importance. Yes, top-down, rock-solid top-down support. Now, how we can do that is that we need to get active in publications that executives and directors read. There's company director style magazines, board education. There's plenty of opportunities to engage, but it's got to be a different message. And you've got to be writing to the right audience. For the individuals, I always come across this myth about that, graduates earn low wages. I think we're almost busted that one. I'm not sure. We could have had a thumbs up or thumbs down. I don't think that's a good idea to have thumbs down, but we could have voted anyway, but maybe for another, I think. We've talked about the trades thing. I think we're getting past that myth. The one that I do feel needs a lot of work is this idea that apprenticeships are a burden on company resources, and that's something I look forward to talking to you about, Bob. I've got a captive audience for 2 days. So I think we need to do some more work and with the apprenticeship community on how we can, that the program benefits more than justify the cost. So I think we need to, get rid of that. I think we get away. I think it's fairly, to me, it's fairly obvious, but I still get people who say, oh, you're teaching people skills that are going to be outdated. That we're not just teaching the technical skills, and I think we keep having to hammer home that we're teaching, interpersonal skills, analytical skills, and skills around resilience and change. Every quality apprenticeship program should make sure somewhere in there you're talking to people about, look, the technical skills you're learning today will likely be, outdated by the time you finish your apprenticeship. So I always like to, drum into these orientations around, lifelong learning. I still get a bit of this inflexibility. And for those in California, you know that there's misconceptions about California, that they think we're all very inflexible out here. Some interactions in the past might have led you to believe that, but there's no question that apprenticeships allow you to launch off into all sorts of different career trajectories. And then just very quickly, Keith, I know we're kind of getting to time on this idea of apprenticeships for entry level. It is interesting. I like to say all ages, all stages. Well, I'm sure other people have said that. But I think that it really is important that, in some countries, I know in Australia, I haven't looked at the US for a while, I think it's like 50% of the apprentices there are over 25 years of age. So it's not just for high school. It's not just youth apprenticeship program. And in fact, interestingly, in countries like Australia, you don't even use the word youth apprenticeship program. It's an apprenticeship program. And then they have this subset called traineeships, which is a business apprenticeship, and they call it a traineeship, which is usually a year in duration in IT or something like that. I don't think I really answered that question, Keith, because I was watching the clock, but I know Harry will pass back to you, but I think we're kind of getting close to time. Thanks for the questions, and thanks for buying my book, Keith.
Thanks, Nick, and thank you, Keith. Great question.
I was wondering who those 2 copies sold to, and now that sold. Actually, there was a third. I know that Bob bought one as well, so there was 3 books sold. So thank you for those 3 people.
Thanks everyone for coming today, and especially thanks to Nick for sharing your experience and expertise. We all look forward to the book, either reading it or listening to American Nick on the audio book. And I think that's just about taking us to time, so I'll close up there. But thanks everyone for coming.
Thanks, Harry, and thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thanks, Cynthia.